Good morning. We are waiting for a quorum in order to start the Crisis Stabilization Committee of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. Good morning, Jack. I see that you are here. Jack Hovenier is here. Todd Donovan and Deacon on the committee, and we have Stephen Gockley and Raylene King from the General Task Force also joining us. And in order for us to carry on business and call the formal meeting, we'll have to have one more person. If I'm looking at our agenda, I will, and I lost it off of my, so our agenda today, here we go, is in part to walk through a racial equity toolkit that Mike Parker offered to do for us, and he'll join us at 10 a.m. I wanted to give some updates on construction issues, and I think I need the agenda up there one more time, please. Thanks. I also wanted to make sure that I talked a bit about some of the issues that we've been dealing with relative to the programming, especially as it relates to an involuntary triage status. And Jill or Todd, you'll know this as well. I can't call the meeting formally until we have a quorum, correct?
I thought as we just couldn't conduct business and do votes if we didn't have a quorum, but Jill would probably know better.
I think it includes discussions.
I know that task force as a whole has had discussions without a quorum, but we just didn't do business. But Jill will let us know, I'm sure.
That's correct. You can't, you can have discussions, yes.
Okay. Well, then let's talk about construction first of all. I was out there last week for a tour of the facility. I think almost all the exterior walls are siding and roofing is complete, which was a big one. The interior walls are all done. They were still pulling some wire, but I would say that we have a lot to do still. My guess is that it will be sometime in November before this building is ready for occupancy. That's my hope. The beginning of October, there will be a few of the elected officials walking through, as well as representatives from each of the prospective tenants, so that we have people able to take a look at what we've done so far. But to remind folks, this facility is being built to manage a high acuity population more than what we're initially planning for, simply because we had the resources available to do so, and we wanted to make sure that this facility was flexible for any purpose in the future that we might need as things change in our community. So each side, each treatment unit, which consists of 16 units or 16 beds apiece, will also have an adjoining seclusion area, so that if involuntary status is granted to either side and somebody actually needs to be secluded away from the quote general population of the unit, they would have that seclusion room available to them. That's an extra addition to this facility that most triage facilities do not have. Actually, no other triage facility in the state, except perhaps one in Benton Franklin, I think, has this. And so we're fortunate to have that. And the other thing we've talked about is that we want this Crisis Stabilization Center to serve as a hub for the behavioral health crisis system in the community. And with that, we have a very large conference room that is going to be accessible to the public. We'll have a lot of our crisis oversight meetings held there, and then each unit has their own, I'm going to use triage in a different way now, but their own triage/admissions area. So first responders can bring people directly to the facility, and that large evaluation area is also going to be open to community members. So that will be really helpful to us. I see Doug Chadwick has joined us, and we now have a quorum. Yay. And you're on mute, Doug.
Apologize for the delay. I was just in another meeting, so at least I didn't have to drive across town.
We are happy that you're here. So construction, I'm just excited for people to see the facility when it's done. We will plan an open house. I think we've got to figure out how to do that. It's not going to be like normal open houses where you have a big ribbon cutting and lots of people and food and lots of folks wandering through the facility. So I think if you have suggestions for how we might do that, that would be great. One thought is you maybe open up an entire week of an open house and schedule tours throughout. We could certainly have a virtual ribbon cutting ceremony, but we want people to be able to see the facility as well before it's operational. So do people have ideas about what we think the community would like and how we might manage this?
And how about contacting one of the local realtors and just having them, you know, just like they do for a house, a virtual tour and just narrate it?
A virtual tour. Hadn't thought of that.
That is a good idea. And the one platform that works, owning 3 real estate offices, I have some experience in this area, Doug. So the platform you'd want to use is something called probably Mindport. Somebody could come in. It's a pretty big facility, so they might charge $300 or $400. The thing about Mindport, it's not only a virtual tour, you can do the 3D. And when that link is either emailed or on a website or whatever, it works seamlessly. And what I'm referring to, like my office has a 3D camera and that works really well. The challenge is where it's hosted has something to do with how the efficacy of people using it. Meaning when you use this Mindport product, virtually every platform can pick up on it. It shows up. So like if it's on Facebook, it shows a little preview. It just works with everything. So the little bit of extra money, if we have that in our budget, and that actually, Ann, could be a resource for a long time. Like it could be like, so if law enforcement wants to show people, hey, here's what the facility looks like. If a mental health professional wants to see. So I could see some value in having a good tour, 3D tour done. And I might be able to get us a little bit of a discount just because of the nature of what it is. But you're certainly looking at a budget of $300 or $400 tops, and it's yours forever.
And we might get a lot more people seeing it that way than, you know.
Yeah, well, and we can disseminate that widely. Like, for example, King 5 wants to do the thing. We could try to get him to do the website link. We could put it on the county website. We could push it out. I think it's a really good idea, Doug. But the trick then is knowing, and I know this because I've done it the wrong way and nobody could look at the 3D video of the houses. So I have learned that this one particular platform seems to work with everything and many others are very proprietary and limited. And the reality is if people click and it doesn't work, they give up pretty quickly.
Good point. So, how do you spell that? Is it M-I-N-D?
I can get you a link. Well, so think of it like, I'm trying to think of so Mindport is just a product, but there's a number of companies that sell that product. So it's not a company, it is more of a protocol or a standard.
It's actually used for video gaming, Mindport. It's a big.
Yeah. I might have it wrong. It might be Mind something else. I need to like Mindport. Because I conflate things all the time. It's Mind something. I think, but my broker support person could definitely tell me what it is. There's at least 2 companies locally that use that. And what they'll tell you is, oh, if we use that product, it costs you $50 more, not because it takes any more time, but because they charge something. They do watermark it with their thing, but it's the way to go.
All right. Oh, great idea.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, because if we get the right video and the right links, we can push it out all over the place. And you own the video. I mean, the county would own, I mean, it's your, so all creative rights go to you, you own it. It's, yeah.
And so maybe the ribbon cutting ceremony could be an entire virtual event. I know that Facilities has a exterior camera where they were planning to show the time-lapse video. The issue is that it's not too exciting because it can only hit one part of the building, but it is somewhat interesting. So we could have that, we could have a few speeches, and we could have the interior tour. That would be a great program, I think. All right, I'm gonna offer that up to the county exec's office and see if they're on board.
You know, Ann, on the video, if you just want to say we'd like a budget of under $500, and Jack and I can, I'll do a little research to make sure if this is on the county site, but whatever it is, let's just have something simple that works flawlessly. And I think it's Mineport, but I can certainly find out. And I like the idea of the resource.
We also have, it's 24,500 square feet.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of room, but each side, each treatment unit matches the other. So I think we can, I don't know that people care about watching both sides being the same. Okay, helpful. All right, so that's the construction piece. Obviously, before occupancy permits are issued, fire marshals have to give the final blessing, and obviously the Department of Health also has to give a final blessing. In other facilities, the Department of Health actually walked through the building via a virtual tour as well. So the last time our architect had to do this, he actually took the camera with him and walked through during the conversation, and the DOH could say, okay, show us where your sprinkler head is here, or so on, and they would show them different things, and it seemed to work. So I don't think that will hold us up, and that's exciting. We do have some concerns from the tenants that they aren't sure how quickly they can staff it up, given that we haven't been able to give them a very firm date of occupancy. Some of them are thinking not before December 1st and maybe as late as January 1st. And I think we can work with all of that. I think we also have to work with our local health department in terms of social distancing requirements and what that will mean. What I can say is each side has single rooms, so people can certainly remain safe in their own rooms, and we have really large common areas in the treatment units. And in fact, each treatment unit is in the shape of an L, so you could have half the people in one end of the L and half on the other. So I think there are ways to keep it safe.
And have we made any progress on long-term operating revenue that has been an issue?
So let me talk about that in conjunction with programming, because that's really important. I have met with the 5 managed care organizations and each tenant to discuss the program, making sure the funders understand the programming and are in support. What I think is a little tricky is that the people that are on those calls aren't always the money decision makers. So we hear great things from the MCOs, and then when it comes to money, there's a little bit of pushback. So 2 things to note. Each tenant is working with the MCOs to get a capacity-based reimbursement, meaning you pay for the operations of this facility 24/7 and not on a per bed day. This is a crisis unit, and just like a fire station, you have to either fund it all or you don't. So there is some pushback from one of the agencies, one of the managed care organizations on that. And we'll see what happens relative to that. But I have emphasized with the tenants, do not negotiate a per diem rate that's a slippery slope, and we'll never get it back. So we need to hold fast to that. We're also meeting, the County Association of Human Services is meeting this afternoon. I co-chair that statewide committee, and we're meeting with the Healthcare Authority, and this will be one of the issues we bring up again as well. Then in terms of the programming relative to funding, the detox side is going to have a higher level of care, 24/7 nursing. So I think some of the managed care organizations are concerned about the additional cost, but that's still being worked on. And then on the mental health side, Compass Health is the chosen tenant. And in order for them to provide an involuntary facility, a program, they are thinking they need extra staffing so that in the event somebody might need to have, to be physically managed and moved into a seclusion room, that they have enough staff to do that. That's more expensive model than a voluntary unit. And so they have recently submitted that cost to the managed care organizations and are hoping to hear back that they'll fully fund it. I think their concern was that managed care organizations might not fully fund the staffing required for an involuntary. Thinking for them, what do they care if law enforcement is helped with this? It's not, law enforcement and money doesn't really matter to the managed care organizations. Obviously, it matters a lot to communities. It's a huge priority for our community. So I think that's where the battleground is right now. We have talked with the sheriff's office about the type of people we would bring to this facility if it was involuntary, trying to help Compass Health understand that the sheriff's office and any of the law enforcement agencies aren't going to be bringing combative, highly agitated people to this facility. Obviously, that's disruptive to a therapeutic environment, and it's also, it's just not the right place. But there are a number of people that could be brought here in lieu of jail or the emergency department. And with law enforcement knowing they could hold somebody for up to 12 hours, that gives them protection against, liability risk. They don't want to bring somebody who just attempted suicide to this facility, knowing that if it's not involuntary, that they could just walk out and harm themselves or someone else. So I think we are on our way, but I think it's a battle, and I think we're kind of at the head of the pack in terms of this battle with the state MCOs. That didn't answer it fully, Todd, because I just think this has been a nightmare for us. Truly, if I can be candid, we went ahead with this project because we had operational funding, and now the MCOs are hemming and hawing. I think they understand the worth to some extent, but they have profit margins that they're looking at.
Oh, that was a good update. I mean, not always good news, but.
My hope is that, we can put, use shame and maybe the leverage of the state healthcare authority as well as the governor's office to address this.
And we appreciate all your work on this. And like I said, it was frustrating to hear kind of at the 11th hour that it was changing from an involuntary facility, and then you have these funding issues. And, we brought up very early on, even in the RFP process, that security and managing difficult patients was going to be something they were going to have to deal with. Otherwise, it will not be utilized by law enforcement, and you're going to have a very expensive facility that's not utilized and will not benefit the community. So I appreciate all your work.
Right. And I do, I have really talked with both EMS as well as the law enforcement agencies, as well as your office, Doug, that please be part of the solution. Help us put pressure where we need to, and help us work to make sure that the programming meets the needs to the greatest extent possible. And I also understand that when you start a brand new program that's totally new to our community and frankly new to our state, that there will be glitches up front, but I just want us all to be part of the solution and not throw up our arms and go, I knew it wouldn't work, right? So I'm kind of holding everybody, all of us accountable to make it work.
No, and I appreciate you having the, more the line level folks giving input on what types of crimes and realizing we're not going to bring violent felons to this facility, but people that may not be appropriate for either the jail or, we still have the ITA process at the hospital.
Right. And I think, I think we can divert a lot of people who probably don't need ITA and sometimes are tossed out by the hospital and yet really still need a place. So
What's ITA again? Involuntary.
excellent. Involuntary Treatment Act. And so that's the civil commitment, right? Where you have a DCR or a designated mental health professional come in and hold somebody against their will for up to 72 hours.
That's for law enforcement, and that's when we respond to those suicidal subjects that we determine are just gravely disabled and a threat to themselves or others, and we take them into protective custody and take them to the hospital so that they hopefully receive the treatment they need.
So the other thing that we did as a county is we had set aside money in our behavioral health program fund to help with startup costs. And so we have been busily purchasing furniture. We purchased a bunch last year with a bit of money we got from another organization and have been storing it. We've now been buying all the rest, including all the kitchen supplies. And we just heard last week that one of our major suppliers, it used to take just a few weeks to get us the product, can't get it to us until November 18th, which was a bit of a shock. But COVID has really challenged us in terms of supply line issues. So, so for instance, we'll have all the beds, but not the mattresses, which probably cruel to not provide mattresses to people. So those are some of the things that we're trying to expedite to the extent possible, but that's quite the challenge. COVID, as you can imagine, is
similar to the challenges that we had with the Byron Street facility, getting refrigerators and beds and all that, supply chain issues.
Yeah. So, but it is what it is. We currently have a reduced census at our current triage facility, and we will do what we have to, but we don't want to open until we're ready to truly operate. We want to start out on the most positive note possible. Questions about any of this? I think the other thing that we'll need help with, and Doug, I'm looking to you on this, is what kind of an orientation and training process should we put in place with first responders? Our EMS manager is certainly front and center in terms of developing protocols for drop-offs directly to this facility, which takes some, agreement from the state. But how do we get the law enforcement agencies all on the same page here?
I would suggest maybe just having a core group of people from all these agencies, kind of like a train the trainer, bring them in, and then they can go back to their agencies. I know coming up, we're doing that very thing with the LEAD program. So representatives from all the agencies will be coming in, getting briefed on the LEAD program and how that's going to work. And then they'll go back and provide whether it's shift briefing training or in-service training to their folks so that everyone's on the same sheet of music. But that's how I would do that. And I'm sure Mike Hilly would be more than happy to facilitate those meetings and pass on that information.
Great. In talking with one of your staff yesterday, they saw this facility as an excellent diversion option for the LEAD program. So as they come into contact with people eligible for LEAD participation, this would be a great
Right,
placed.
and those are the nonviolent crimes that I think would be appropriate for that facility.
Great. And then the other question has been, as we vacate the old facility, which has 13 beds right now and then office space and a central lobby outside of that, how might we use that? And so lots of different ideas. One idea is to work with the Compass Health, who's providing the mental health services, to have some of their programs located there so that there would be people who could respond in the event that there needed to be more people in the treatment unit when there's an episode that requires the physical management of somebody, and that might reduce this overall daily staffing costs. So those are some of the things we're looking at also, Todd, to try to manage costs and make sure that it's adequately funded, and that maybe they don't need that same staffing 24/7 if they have staff nearby who are able to respond.
Is Compass interested in that? That's
Yes. Yeah. So
And
we
again,
will.
Pioneer is currently, they're the provider there now.
You know, actually, Pioneer and Compass Health are both providing services at the current location. Pioneer rents it and subleases out to Compass. But our rent to that at that facility is $100 a month. So that's, and then they of course pay a share of the utilities. So it's a good rate, and I think it helps us recruit the kind of program we want for that. The new facility, we've set the lease at $2,000 per tenant a month. And then the rest is going to be subsidized by the county and the city of Bellingham to help offset costs, because they'll all have to pay their utilities directly to the companies they have agreements with. Raylene? You're in the dark, Raylene, with that bright window behind you.
Sorry, Ann, I just have
Oh,
to.
there you are.
Question for you. I don't know if this has been asked before, so bear with me, but is there any facilities for juveniles in crisis that are separate?
Not really.
Is
And I
that
don't.
something that could be looked at for that facility?
So when we've done our research in the past, and we of course did a needs assessment both locally and regionally, even when we were planning this facility, to determine is it needed, and if so, how many beds, etc. And we did not have the demand for this type of facility for youth that would justify the cost. Because a 24/7 facility, of course, is very expensive to run. And we didn't have the numbers at that time. Last time we did this needs assessment, that was in 2016. And I still think that's a challenge for us throughout the state. You know, if I think about our juvenile detention program, for instance, here in the county, we only have a handful of youth in that at any given time. Sometimes maybe one person. I mean, it's some of the laws have changed that have impacted that, but also the biggest driver is not that we don't need a facility like that, but that it's very expensive to run and we don't have the ability to support it financially.
I would like to see if we could run the numbers again. I understand the expense, but the juveniles are only going to be adults at some point. And I think it's necessary to look at, as I've seen parents that have been frustrated because there's not a place for their kids. I've also been advised that there's not a separate unit at the hospital when there's a child that's mentally unstable, which the state law requires, and unfortunately we're not meeting those standards. And so I have a really large concern for the juveniles and the justice, because I don't think it's going to get better if we don't have a separate place other than detention for them.
So I'll bring this to the Regional Behavioral Health Administrative Service Organization. They're the ones who are in charge of the crisis system in our region, the behavioral health crisis system. And I will talk with them about this. They may have some numbers already that can be looked at, but.
Stephen Gockley has his hand raised.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
Thanks, Ann. I just want to make sure that I'm putting all the operational funding pieces together. We're set now with the state appropriated money for a while. Is that correct? So there's no time pressure on dealing with the MCOs in the short term.
Not exactly. So we have money from the state through June of 2021. And certainly we can go back and ask for it. Last time it was Representative Shoemake who made that happen. Right. I know she's up for re-election, and she certainly said that she was willing to help us get more if necessary. And being a pilot for an involuntary triage might be a great reason to do that. So that's a possibility. I haven't spoken with her opponent in the race to see if that person also might be supportive of this. But it's only through the end of June, and it's only going to be around 250,000 total because it's 500,000 a year. So it won't fully cover potential losses.
And you said there's sort of one recalcitrant MCO on the firehouse funding model. Does it require unanimity, or can you carve that MCO out of access? I don't know what the alternatives are.
Well, I certainly supported that. Right now, I think they have about 15 to 20% of the population that uses detox currently is covered by that entity. So, yeah. And the MCOs have a requirement in their contract that they have to have these services in their provider network. So if a provider refuses to contract with them, and then they don't have it in their network. And I have certainly encouraged Pioneer, who runs these services in Island County, Skagit, and Whatcom, to use their leverage. So there's a lot of behind the scenes dancing, as you can imagine, Stephen. Are there questions about all this? Okay, so Raylene, I will ask the ASO what kind of discussions are happening at a state level and what data they may have now. Last time it was the health department locally, we did the needs assessment for our county. I know that right now we don't have the capacity to do that with the pandemic going on, but that pandemic won't last forever. Take it from me. Okay, so any other questions about the facility itself? All right, good. I think we've got some good things. Oh, Jet.
I had one, and it's really minor early on. And sorry, you guys, stepping out. I've been in full crisis mode. I had a kid in the hospital for 10 days, another person. So I'm listening, but being here for quorum and also taking care of life. So the problem with COVID and working at home is you can't ever really get away from anything. Anyway,
and you can't go outside because of the smoke.
No, now even the anti-mask people see some merit in it. It looks like, I live at Sandy Point, and the tugboats for the refineries are blowing their horns all night because of the fog density, but that smoke. So not that I expect any of you to feel sorry for me that my waterside cabin is interrupted by loud noises all night, but it is irritating. And on the large rooms, I have a passion for 12-step and peer-to-peer. I assume it will be available for that from time to time on a regular basis.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that large room where we can have those groups has a door into the treatment areas
Perfect.
that even though it's locked, it will allow people on the unit to come into that room.
I know for detox, both Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous have a long history of providing, like once a week or so, a 12-step meeting for people in those facilities. And I'm sure both would want to continue. And so that's great.
Yeah. And I think this committee was really helpful in designing the floor plan to.
Oh, no, I remember talking about it, asking where the room was. But, and the other thing about those programs, they will be inherently flexible, meaning if Tuesdays are always bad for the facility because the county needs it, they'll take what they can get as long as it's generally something regular. Obviously, it might have to be canceled on occasion, but not often. That would be good. And it's helpful because it creates a bridge for reentry for some people. So thank you.
Great. Yep. The one thing I forgot to mention that will be really important, we're still telling the providers, even though there's 2 of them, that they have to work between them to make sure there's just 1 phone call into the facility. And that we don't want the public to have to guess, who do I call? And same for first responders. Sometimes in the field, you've got a mixed presentation and we don't want them to have to figure out which door sometimes. Whichever door they bring them to will be the door that does the initial screening, and at that point a decision can be made if they need to be treated first by the other side, but really trying to streamline that process so people don't have to make guesses in the field or out in the public. All right, so the other thing on our list is the racial and ethnic disparities issue, and Mike Parker was going to join us at 10. He isn't here yet, but did have a toolkit for us to look at. And I think what we asked, at least the Administrative Service Organization, which is the regional entity that oversees the publicly funded crisis system for behavioral health, they in fact told us they collect race and ethnicity data from the current providers and will continue to do so at this facility. So we have a sense of utilization and hoping that our utilization is reflective of our population. But going forward, there was an effort by the task force generally to pay attention more closely to the issue of these disparities and to look at ways that we might be able to address any concerns. I did not plan to do anything about this, and I don't see that Mike is on the phone. So Jill, let me ask you, is there anything else on our agenda besides this?
Other business and public hearings, and Mike said he'd be in shortly after 10. If the committee would like to still hear his presentation, maybe you can recess the committee briefly and see if he pops up in the next few minutes.
All right, and is there any public comment, or I don't see any public on the phone or on the meeting?
The only 2 attendees I have are Jackie Mitchell and Perry.
Well, they always have something to say. All right, so let me ask then the wish of the committee. So Jill sent out a toolkit. We could certainly take a look at it individually and not go over it in this meeting. And Jack, I'm kind of looking at you to see what the expectation is of the general task force relative to this, you and Stephen, or
oh, here's Mike.
Oh, well, there you go. So Mike, we were just getting ready to roast you, but now that you're here, we'll hold back, or maybe not. So
sorry to be late. I just got a inside view of base camp, and that is quite a facility.
It's impressive.
Yes. So apologies for being late. So.
And thank you to the county's various grants for shelters that have allowed us to put that together, and the city's efforts to do the work of getting it together.
Oh, is that the name of the old Terra Organica?
Yep.
Which is the
Also
old
the
Day
name
of Kuwait?
that was an outdoor gear store right down on Holly Street a few years ago.
Oh, Base Camp on Holly. Yeah. Okay,
But it's now the drop-in center, right?
got it.
Right.
Yeah, it's a cool building with the logs and yeah.
And they have their
Yeah.
sign up too, Base Camp. out
They
on the corner.
do. Brand new turquoise sign. And the health department got a shout out. So they're
You have terrible sound all of a sudden, Mike.
right. Is that any better?
So
Let me see if I
something
can.
happened.
Okay.
I think it sounded better the last second there.
How's that? Better? Okay. My apologies. Sometimes it makes me sound like Darth Vader.
Yes.
Anyways, he was mentioning that they have not had a positive case in guests, but at a couple of times in which they were worried or somebody was symptomatic, you all helped. And anyway, so you guys got a good shout out and says that he's on the phone regularly with your health department staff. So they're enjoying that partnership and keeping people safe. And it's impressive if you haven't seen it. It really is something to see. So.
Right. I think we were very fortunate as a community to get that population into a large facility ASAP. Obviously, the concern was that in close quarters, having that many people get COVID would overwhelm our healthcare system. So didn't happen. Good for us.
Yeah.
So Mike, we just finished the last portion of our agenda and you are on.
Okay.
And maybe you could just give us the Cliff Notes version and make sure we don't miss anything important.
You bet. If you all would allow me, I'd like to go ahead and share a screen, but the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Who's that host?
Yeah.
That's Jill. I'm sure it's not personal, Mike.
Right?
One moment while I upgrade you, Mike. Hang on just a second.
Okay. Oh, that's what I needed, an upgrade.
All right.
Don't we all?
You're now co-host. Are you able to share?
Share screen. I
Looks
believe
like it's working.
you all seeing anything? Okay.
There it is. Yes. Good job.
Okay. I haven't done this much. If you couldn't tell, I'm usually the victim of other people's presentations. So very briefly, thank you all for having me in your subcommittee meeting today. As many of you know, everybody on steering knows, been talking about the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force adopting a Racial Equity Toolkit. And one of the things that we thought about in steering was, well, people need to know what that is. What does that mean? What does it look like? Why should we do it? How is it going to help us? So I just very briefly, I'm just going to share some of the research that I've done. The information I'm going to share in the tool is from GARE, which is the Local and Regional Governmental Alliance on Racial Equity. And they're working with over 100 communities across the country as those communities strive for a more racially equitable justice system. So I think it provides a possibility for us to evaluate and adopt. A quick disclaimer, I'm not the best person to make this case to you. I'm not a person with lived experience. I'm a person that's white and of privilege, and I'm formally educated. But you get me because I'm here. If there's somebody in the room, or I'm sure there are others that are more advanced and can share different things with you. So with that, I'll go ahead and start. So we're all here because we want to reduce incarceration. And some of the things that we're hearing and that you see in the news and people are protesting is that some of our needs are not getting met. And we all, while we do want to reduce incarceration, we still want a criminal justice system that keeps us safe. I'm hearing that we all want a society where our children thrive. And we want a system that is just and equitable for all. Currently, though, these are national statistics, by the way, from the Prison Policy Initiative. We can see that we're failing in that area. I don't have Whatcom statistics for you all, but this group is aware of those through our index committee. So while 64% of the US population is white, need to move this thing, 39% of the prison population is white. African Americans are 13% of the US population, but they represent 40% of the prison population. So we're not meeting some of those goals that some of us want. Another aspect about why communities like ours and committees like ours are adopting racial toolkits, because we've kind of realized there's no such thing as a non-racist policy. This was hard for me at first to understand. So I'll read you this brief. I think you all can see it, but it's from Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. There's no such thing as a non-racist or race-neutral policy. Every policy in every institution, in every community, in every nation is producing or sustaining either racial inequity or equity between racial groups. Now that's key. It can be either one, right? But in and of itself, it's perpetuating the status quo. So here we are in charge of making recommendations to various different entities in our criminal justice system to make change. I think, and I think others do too, that we can be a leader in creating a racially equitable justice system. One of the things that we need, though, is we might need tools to help us. We need a framework to be able to use as we ponder different interventions. You know, some of the initial targets, I looked over the charter, and we've made good movement on that. And this would not say that aren't good changes. They're very positive changes. So why would we adopt a racial equity toolkit? These are some quotes from the organization itself. Racial equity tools are designed to integrate explicit consideration of racial equity in decisions, including policies, practices, programs, and budgets. It's both a product and a process. Use of a racial equity tool can help develop strategies and actions that reduce racial inequities and improve success for all groups. Again, this goes back to our goals. Too often, policies and programs are developed and implemented without thoughtful consideration of racial equity. When racial equity is not explicitly brought into operations and decision-making, racial equities are likely to be perpetuated. Racial equities tools provide a structure for institutionalizing the consideration of racial equity. I know you all can read that, but it's powerful for me to be able to hear it out loud. And I think when I think about the work that we're involved in on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, it just seems to be such a fit. Back again to GARE's particular racial equity tool. If you Google this, which Jill and I did, you will see lots of racial equity tools out there. So what's unique about GARE? Why should we look at GARE? Well, one, they work with government entities and those entities working to reform elements of government. So it's specifically tied. It has language, it has context, and it has a lot of helpful framework that acknowledges the work that we're doing. Proactively, it seeks to eliminate racial inequities, helps us identify clear goals, objectives, and measurable outcomes. It engages the community in a decision-making process. And I've talked to many members who think that we can improve in that area. Identifies who will be benefit or burdened by a given decision, who wins and who loses in another way. And it develops mechanisms for successful implementation and evaluation. So what is it? I've had that asked, well, what is a racial equity toolkit? It sounds really complex. It's actually not. It starts with a simple set of questions. And here are those 6 questions. And you can enter into this process at any point. So just the fact that this committee has been going, I think, Jack, remind me if I'm correct, but since 2015, is that right?
I think it's 15. It's been, about 5 years, I think.
About 5 years.
Stephen's been there from the beginning, and Ann too. So
yeah. So a good long time, but it's there's no wrong time to begin this type of work. And we can kind of reanalyze some of the solutions that we've made and some of the progress we've made. So just very briefly, it begins with a proposal. What is that policy, program, practice? What are the desired results and outcomes? If we're talking about reducing incarceration, we're talking about home monitoring, we flesh that proposal out. Data, which we already have a mechanism to do, and looking at index and other things. What does the data tell us? The third set of questions are around community engagement. Who's at the table? Who's not at the table? Are there opportunities to expand engagement? And as we've discussed, especially with folks with lived experience, it's really crucial. And we're hearing that they've felt shut out. 4 is analysis and strategies. So looking at our given proposal, maybe the Crisis Stabilization Center, who's going to benefit or who might not? And what are your strategies for advancing racial equity or mitigating something that might be unintended? Number 5, the 5th part of the question is, what is your plan for implementation? And number 6, accountability and communication. How do you ensure accountability, communicate, and evaluate results? So that, in a nutshell, that is the core. And what, of course, the toolkit gives us is a lot more. I want to emphasize that adopting a toolkit isn't like, oh, we dealt with racial equity, we're done. It's just a beginning to help shape an equity lens in creating just and equitable policies. But it'll also provide really powerful information as we go through that process that I think will help move this group in a more inclusive and equitable process. So I'm going to very briefly, and I can answer questions, but again, I'm not that expert, but I did want to show you the toolkit itself. So bear with me.
And Jill, is that the document you sent out earlier this morning?
Yes. Mike, I have that pulled up if you want me to share.
Okay. I did just find it. Thank you for the offer of rescue. Sorry, I didn't navigate this.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so just very briefly, one of the whole purposes of me coming today is talking a little bit about the Racial Equity Toolkit, exposing people to the concept. Here is actually the toolkit. Now there are different ways to engage in this. You can just use the toolkit in your own organization right now today. You can also join as a member, and there's a lot of benefits to doing that.
Mike, I believe you need to stop sharing your PowerPoint first, and then you can start sharing the GARE toolkit.
Thank you. Screen sharing is paused. New share. Jill, did I do it?
You did very well.
Oh my gosh, look at all this training I'm getting. You guys, I'm sorry, you're giving my guinea pigs. So most of the information, by the way, on the slides, the quotes, the processes, none of that is mine. That is all from this organization. But you can see in some of this language, why should government use this racial equity tool? And although we're not government, we're working very, very closely in and around, we're of and by and for, and certainly trying to reform aspects of our government system. So I want to stop now and just show you that list of questions that I literally put in here. So here's your racial equity tool. And it was a great question by one of the steering members. Well, what is it? And it sounds awfully complex. And while it can go very deep, and it should, it also can start fairly simply, and I think is a low barrier to entry. So with that, I'll stop. And if anybody has any questions that I might be helpful with, I'm happy to answer.
I have a question for Jack and Stephen. You know, what's the expectation of the task force generally, and what are some objectives that you have?
Go ahead, Stephen. You can start.
Well, I think there's a very high level desire to affirm this kind of lens, this kind of perspective, and apply it across our work. I think there's a very intense expectation, I might even say demand, from community observers of our work and the larger systems that we're working in to be more responsive to these kinds of considerations. So I think the motivation is probably as high as it's ever been to focus more intently and with more resources on equity throughout the criminal legal system. And Mike suggested a toolkit as a way to sort of a template to analyze our thinking and our outcome evaluations from that perspective. I right now I think there's a fairly high level of interest in doing that. This is what Mike has brought to us, and I don't know who else has done the kind of digging that Mike has done. Many thanks to you, Mike. But formally adopting it or finding the exact niches within task force work to really make use of this, I don't think is something that we've adequately talked through and made a decision on. I think there's some sense that we'd like to do that, and we'd like to do that sooner rather than later. Jack, do you have anything to add to that?
I think all that's accurate. I recall a conversation, I believe at steering committee, where the issue came up. My recollection of that was we saw it as a task force issue. I remember saying that no matter what we adopt, we are an advisory body. However, we can use this lens in our own work, and we can recommend that the other parts of the criminal justice system can do likewise. But in other words, we can't adopt it for the county. We could simply adopt it for our work and the way that we're making recommendations, and then encourage that go out. But I think other than that, I think that there was a motion or something that really passed unanimously that captured the spirit of what I just said. So I would say there was consensus and support, but there has to be a recognition of what the limits of what we can or can't do.
Donovan has his hand raised.
I start teaching with the Zoom stuff next week, and I'm still figuring out how to like raise and lower my hand. I think that went down. So I think this is really, it's a great direction to be moving. And this is just kind of my trying to figure out how it would be applied question. So I'm looking through the document that we just had on the screen that Jill sent earlier. We would go like, okay, we're going to ask what's the proposal in the project? Is it the entire mission of the task force, or do we do it for more discrete things like, we were just talking about the crisis triage facility? Do we do it on a kind of like piece by piece thing, or are we applying it to the total mission, or both?
That's an excellent question. I think the authors would tell you both, and the order of which I think could be figured out. I can instantly think about proposal for electronic home monitoring and how we might run that process through a racial equity toolkit. I get that pretty quick. Now, the other part that you mentioned, that more fundamental foundational work, I think is equally important. And what I've heard that many organizations, when they begin this work, they start with a really deep assessment. So they might look at, say, the entire structure, the entire charter of the group in the case of this particular body, and start from there. But I don't know that there's a right way and a wrong way. And certainly we can, depending on the level of interest for this group, like I said, you can join, become a member, and get a lot of ongoing support. They also make available to us the toolkit itself, and some things, communication kits, are available at low to no cost. So I think we could probably get some assistance with that, but I think the short answer is both and the order of which I think maybe could be talked about. But I don't know if Stephen or anybody else have a thought on that.
It seems to me that a place for us to start is to gather data on who we're serving or responding to in all of our different areas that the task force is involved in. So if I just take this committee specifically, I think besides collecting that data in terms of who is using our facility, maybe that would also indicate to us who should we be reaching out to form more collaborative relationships, and what is it that we either need to offer, or how do we help enhance the possibility that certain populations will use this facility as needed, and what might we need to do in terms of our programming to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the people that do come. So those are some things that came to mind just specifically for this group, and I think I wouldn't know where to start until I had some data about who's using our facility. And is it representative of our community, and is it representative of national trends in terms of who tends to use crisis services and who doesn't? So
I think another aspect, and to add on to what you just said, in particular how this subcommittee could use this, is also who was at the planning table, who wasn't, and are there maybe populations or perspectives that maybe to date haven't been included to the extent that we wished that they had? Could we, even this late in the game, work like the devil to try to increase that, expand that reach, and be more inclusive in the planning purposes? That might be another thing that a racial equity toolkit might force us to do, is look at who did we invite to the table, who was there at the table, and who do we need to get there.
great, yeah, helpful. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think Mike is right that maybe at least the starting point for thinking how to apply this would be at the both and the overall task force perspectives and individual project work. That's already going on, for instance, in the pretrial processes work group, and in thinking about a pretrial release risk assessment tool. Racial equity considerations in the selection of the tool and the evaluation of how it might play out once we adopt it are really front and center, maybe the central topic that work group is considering. So I like the 6 questions as a framework for continuing those discussions. I wonder, Mike, you're more familiar with the material than I. I wonder how much one can start with some of those issues. And what I'm thinking is one of the messages we've gotten from outside the task force and even from some within about our communications is sort of the closed circle that we have. Subcommittees have set priorities by discussing with only a small in-group of people what those priorities should be. So I'm thinking of the piece that's called community engagement and the 6 questions. That's something that, I mean, we could start seeking community engagement, community input, community direction tomorrow if we wanted to, or start thinking about how to form that. So there might be some places to start that aren't quite as large scale or as comprehensive as the whole 6 questions themselves.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And as you mentioned, that's really foundational, isn't it? You know, who is consulted, whose views are included. And while that point was made before protests around George Floyd, that point was made in this group a while ago. But having run a coalition for a while, I also really acknowledge how difficult and challenging sometimes that can be. And I just think that's really important to bring out, and why I apologize for me being the messenger. Sometimes we find ourselves in these situations and it can be tough. But I think who is at that table is an excellent place to start. And regardless of the fact that maybe some of these groups have been in existence since 2015, and some might say you should have done it a long time ago, I say, oh, well, we're going to do it now. Let's start doing that. And what will that inform in our process as we go forward by just looking at the composition of the groups or the way in which we communicate? We don't know. And that's part of what this process will bring us, is what we don't know.
Todd?
So the task force every year provides an annual report to the council. Maybe it's too soon for this next one, but having that framework as part of that annual report might kind of keep us focused on some of these issues. And I hope I remember that when it comes to the time we're like, what do we want in the annual report? But that'd be a good thing to be thinking about.
Good point.
Todd, just one of the places this could play out, and there's already some consideration of it, is the rethinking the ordinance that designates the membership of the task force. I'm wondering what, I know you're only one of several, but what your perspective as a council member would be on that, and how we might go about that.
I think we've redone it just recently. There's a problem with having this in an ordinance. We have to do another ordinance to change the composition. But if the task force comes to the council with suggestions of needing to change the composition for racial equity purposes or whatever purposes they're needing, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, but I think it'd be well received. But I get the process, I think, would be the task force as a whole coming up with a proposal and, maybe involving one or two of us along the way, and then coming to council.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Other thoughts? Sounds like we have a lot to work on here and figure out how we want to move forward. All right. Is there anything else for the good of the order today? Or Jackie and Perry, did we miss anything that we want to make sure is said today? I see Jackie and Perry are showing up, but not talking.
I just allowed them to talk if they do have anything.
Oh. Jill, I wish I had that power.
Nothing from me.
Okay. All right.
Well, I had one question because I might have missed it. What is the opening date?
We didn't give one.
We've been asking that question for a couple of years.
I would say don't think it's going to happen before November.
Okay.
But Ann did give us an update that there's walls and roofs and interior work being done, and it's moving along.
It looks like a real building.
Outstanding. Thank you for that.
But the COVID supply chain has created some tricks, as has just personnel. But yeah, I can tell you for sure by January 1, it's going to be a going concern.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. So then, if there is nothing else, I will bid you all a good weekend. Hopefully clearer skies ahead. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Ann.
Everybody.